Hey everyone. In this discussion today, I'm going to look at how we approach mixing the digital with the real. This will address ideas from concept to delivery. I'll talk through three projects. One was the Fox Sports Doha set for the World Cup in 2022. Another one will be Guns N' Roses' audio reactive band intro sequence segment for their show, and that was on the World Tour in 2023. And then the other one for Junior Eurovision for their opening sequence we created for them that featured a lotus flower outro that was a mix between a 3D lotus flower outro and a mechanical flower that was sitting on the stage. I'll talk about things along the lines of how to start, what questions to ask, and keep in the forefront of your mind at all times. Like, what are we creating and why should we be doing that? That's always something to keep in mind on anything that has a long time frame and there are lots of people involved, and you need to make sure that no time is wasted in the process, or as little time as possible. So those two questions hold everyone to account to make sure that we're not diving into blind alleys and wastes of time that will cause us problems right at the end. And also those two questions ensure that the creative visionaries, stakeholders at the front end know what they're walking the frontline technical guys on the ground. They know what they're walking them into when they come up with ideas that may cause a disjunction between the imagined versus the reality. I'll also talk about how we develop the ideas for each project, from sketch through to previs, through to testing, design, and then implementation, which again, a lot of these ideas look very simple in theory, but as soon as you get into the project itself, it always expands out into something bigger than anybody thought, and sometimes 5 times more work than anyone can imagine. In fact, that's generally the rule, is that anything you undertake in this area where you are trying to merge a conceptual idea into reality, there's so much involved in terms of, let alone thinking about the right starting point, all the way through to the actual implementation on the ground. There's so much involved in that. I'll also talk about challenges in design and in production as well, how you pace the to and fro between different entities with different objectives, different intents. For example, in my world, the main thing that I need to get across is to make sure the brand story gets told in the most exciting and interesting way I can. But when you're a front line, what you need to do is whatever comes down the pipe from people like us works and has been thought through and can be executed and delivered to the vision that has been developed for that team. So it's really important that we understand that there are lots of challenges, and especially when you're working, say, in real time, that you understand just how long it takes to go through the stages, from blocking out the idea through to animating it, through to building the 3D assets, to filming, to testing, to calibrating everything on the ground. There's a huge process that goes into that. And we understand every single stage to a greater or lesser extent, or at least the broad strokes, enough to hand the right information over to those professionals down on the ground. And then also at the end, I'll show you the end result of each one, so you can see just how much work goes into just creating 5, 6, 10, 15 seconds worth of choreographed, carefully made, laser focused content that looks high quality and does the job of the storytelling that it needs to accomplish. So with that said and done, I'm Dan Potter, creative director at Creative Works, and hope you find this interesting. So the first project I'm going to talk about, the Fox Sports Doha broadcast set, where we worked on this trophy reveal, this World Cup trophy reveal, and this was the final result of the trophy reveal. It was a nice piece of AR visuals that towards the back end of the tournament, they brought this out as a bit of a change from what they were presenting up until that point. So this hadn't been seen at that point, and we'd started this building this concept, this idea with Fox, maybe 2 or 3 weeks before the actual tournament was due to start. So this idea came late in the process as a result of us working on an opener that was going on the screens around the set, around the broadcast set. The original idea for this this came from to do this came from a combination of us working on an animation sequence that would populate the exterior of the set, and then it was something that came out of that process that Gary Hartley spotted and said, this sequence here, which I'll show you now. So as we were building this animation sequence, this idea was around, getting across the idea that the World Cup was coming to Qatar, Doha, and part of that story was this idea of the trophy rising up through like a trophy silo. I was calling it a trophy silo. In and around that, there was lots of these kind of Kufic assemblies, like jewelry boxes folding in and out, and it was very much a light show driven type idea. Lots of things growing up around the environment to make it an ever changing, almost like representative of the tournament. But in part of the animation, there was this idea of this trophy silo. As the World Cup trophy rose out of this silo, this was the insight point that Gary was like, "Oh no, we could do something with this that would work as an AR piece in the set," which ended up being this one here. So this is where this one ended up coming from. The actual process itself took quite a long time to actually get right, because we first had to build the assets. But prior to that, from this initial insight point here, this insight of this trophy rising through, first thing I did once we'd had this instruction was to go to the sketch and just work out exactly what we were talking about collectively. And so I went back and produced a sketch to absolutely clarify what we were aiming for. So in order to make sure that we were on the same page and what we were talking about was the same thing, I sketched this out as a quick sketch, literally maybe within a day of us having a conversation about this, because I wanted to get the project going quickly so that we had enough time to develop the idea further. And one of the first things I did was to make sure that we were all on the same page. So this was my first sketch as a result of that. We had to navigate some of the nuanced elements of this, like how was it going to unfold out of the floor and rise up. And my first thought was that it was some kind of portal, and as it rose up through, the portal opened up along the lines of the animation that we'd already developed, rose out of that and came to a stop. The other thing I didn't know was would we have the two teams together? As you see in the animation, the animation showed where they ended up was that the two teams were in the back and on the screens in the back, and we had created content for those back screens, but those back screens we used for editorial to tell the story. So around it was the package elements, and then we had our pieces running on top of that as well in some places. So this opening element was deemed the way to go. So the presenter was standing on like a glass ceiling, but everything opened and the trophy rose out. So it was a real change in the visual idea of that, but it worked really well in terms of getting the story of, right, we're heading closer to competition finality, the finals, and in this particular matchup, it was Argentina possibly meeting either France or Morocco in the final. So I sketched out various perspectives to make sure that we were including the right parts of the scene in, and these then went on to inform animations that we tested out. I just wanted to cover all the bases and really explore the ideas. So things like effects and glow and how the composition was going to be structured. I started working on those ideas and gave various options as well, that it may be that you could show several teams. So if it was a semi-final, for example, you'd have two teams either side, and you could represent it metaphorically speaking. So you could metaphorically and abstractly represent those teams in the final, depending on who was in there. Either number of teams in terms of matchups, so one team against another or one team against another, or in something a little more like a full column of rotating team sprites. So I was kind of looking for something that was quite magical, but yet still had a degree of function. We then moved on to blocking those ideas out, modeling those ideas up in the context of the environment that was going to be presented in. So this was one of the storyboards that we developed collectively, and then all the time referencing the modeling that we'd done. And this was pre-lit, pre-made style frame to show perspective and a point of view. And here we are showing those ideas as outlined previously in the sketches. What happened ultimately is that we ended up simplifying the actual final product. As you see in the final animation, it was just a trophy that was needed, because sometimes you can shoot for quite a wide set of ideas, but at the end of the day, what it comes down to is what you can achieve within the time with the broadcast team, and how you can set these set pieces up. Sometimes less is more, and it ended up becoming just simply about those two teams heading towards the final to meet each other and and getting their hands on that trophy. We then did an animatic to show the different ways that it would work, and we also did various style frames, locked off shots to actually show potential perspectives, and these were mainly the upstream stakeholder vision and also the downstream production team who were working with the stakeholder to make sure that we were both conveying the right ideas in the right way, so that there wasn't an overlapping understanding of what we were collectively trying to achieve. Again, here another development on the animation, this time looking at the entirety of the space, and this one here was closer to the original or the final outcome, which was the whole floor opens up and then the trophy is on a plinth. This one again was talking about how the actual shot would rest, although when it came down to it, what they needed to do was take these ideas, and when they actually took our Unreal Engine model off of us, they would then do all of the necessary lining up and tweaking that was necessary. So there's always this handover between what is a final asset versus what is an asset that needs to go into final production to be finalized by that on the ground frontline production team. And here this one was concentrating on the build-up element, which they didn't use, which was a pre-made animation element rising into the AR effect, but we didn't end up doing that. They ended up cutting straight to the shot, as you saw in the final, where you've got the commentator, you've got the host standing on the floor, and then the trophy silo rising out of the floor in one simple straight shot. Again, this was a better animation and was more closer to what we were talking about in the final shot, although again at the end they went for a camera jib that was looking down on the commentator. This was another animatic that we created, so this was showing another option and including the Kufic fireworks that we would at that point be talking about. These were used in the animation we created for the surrounding environment, as you can see here, but the idea was to somehow provide some different kinds of shots for the AR trophy, which included these Kufic fireworks from the main animation you see in the LED elements of the set behind and beyond the trophy. This was an idea that we proposed, which again needed more time to actually execute, because it does take time to build these elements. It's really an emerging art. The idea of creating things in real time in Unreal Engine, on the surface of it, seems entirely possible and entirely doable. But once you get into actually creating these elements, it's like anything, like a game, anything that needs to be choreographed, needs to be technically developed and deployed at the level that is seen in gaming. These things take many, many weeks and lots of people to fine tune and tweak everything from the texturing through to the modeling, through to the supplying of the right elements. The on the ground frontline guys need to take hold of the model and then work with the show directors, the producers, and look at everything and see how everything's looking. So if you go into it, a lot of the time, the simpler the idea, the better it will survive through the process. In this case, the idea that we were given from the creative director we were working with at Fox Sports, Gary Hartley, he already knew where it was going to end up. So he gave us enough latitude to explore it with lots of options when it came down to it. And once they got on set and they were looking at it, he could then adjust with the show producers exactly how they wanted that trophy to look. So here was a shot that we were sent when they were testing it. And this was the first test we'd seen. So we'd supplied the Unreal Engine model. They were using this in Rizos, testing it. You can see here, it was flickering and it was not behaving properly. So they knocked it back to us and then we did further optimization on the model. But our first pass on it was just to show what we thought we were working with. Once they tested it, they were able to then see how our model was working within the playback system, and then they were able to then come back to us and then tell us what was wrong with our model, or that we needed to improve elements in the model. Overall though, from start to finish, we ended up here collectively, all the way from that initial spark of insight that grew from another piece of the project that gave us a piece of brand and event storytelling that was then developed through exploring options, iterations, showing potential, showing many different ways to bring the idea to life, and using other effects, down to simplifying what was needed, which was the opening floor, and then the trophy rising to the level that the host was at, so that he could discuss the idea of two teams working towards the final and getting their hands on that trophy. And you find this is quite a novel, surprising result that we got, which from the viewer's point of view, as the tournament progressed, it felt like production values were being increased as the tournament proceeded. So for the Guns N' Roses World Tour in 2023, we got the opportunity to play a little more with the technology setup that we had in the set, using the disguise servers. And this was a really good chance for me to work with the team to push what we could achieve with what we had. At the beginning of the tour, I'd got this abstract particle-driven theme running, which you can see in the BST stage here. So I've got this sort of look going on, which was a combination of hard objects with particle-driven elements to it that gave us this interesting and almost artistic look. And this was a look that would then become the visual glue throughout each of the shows that happened between each of the songs. So you had an opener that had a theme about it, and in this case it was Paradise Gate, and then you go into this mad kind of like weird, strange, novel journey into the heart of Guns N' Roses, into the world of Guns N' Roses. And we used this sort of particle-driven aesthetic that was inspired by the band management coming to us and saying, can we move away from the Robert Williams AFD robot and the monster, the Red Baron, I call him, look and feel, and into something a little different than we've done from 2020 to 2022. And so this was the response. We come up with this particle-driven element, and it was this. There was a sequence in here with lightning that came off really well, and I really liked this element that Mike Wilson had created here. I used that as the at least to me, the guide for what we produced in the band intros section. So in the band intro section here, it would be a lull in the show, and things would calm down, and it would give Axl an opportunity to come in and introduce each of the band members to the audience. For me, that was a great opportunity to, at low risk, experiment with some of the audio reactive tools in the setup to make use of the mic feed from Axl and then feed into the disguise servers, which we knew we could achieve. But as with everything like this, it takes time to dial in the right look and feel to make sure that the lightning is working in the right way. So Mike Wilson got to work with the notch block and started to build this idea of this kind of particle-driven ambient environment that was the backdrop to the band. So again, it kind of worked with the backlighting, the idea that we'd had going into the tour, to make it low-key and very atmospheric and ambient. But what was great was that every time Axl spoke, the lightning would light up and it would ignite the environment, and then you'd also get the crowd noise rising, which would also affect the screen. So it took a little while to do that, and we started work on that idea in the first show in 2023 in Abu Dhabi, and it took us several shows to actually get it working, with some failures here and there, especially at BST. You could see at BST, but the good thing about it was I always knew that I had a backup. So if it didn't go quite to plan, I had a backup that I could fall back to, which was just the look and feel, and therefore it would still convey what we were trying to do with the show, with this kind of like ambient, like sort of particle field behind the band, but without the lightning. Anyway, this was an example of once we got it working, it worked really well. The audience got to see the connection between the voice and the screen. And I'm hoping in some ways, I'm pretty sure the shows that I was at, that the audience were then firing up that screen based on the audio itself. So this was another example of adding novelty in a way that was subtle. It kind of fitted with the overall theme of the show, look and feel, and it gave a degree of interaction that mixed the digital with the reality. So for Junior Eurovision, we've been working on this opening animation sequence, and it started with the Eurovision ident, and then it went out of that into our opening sequence, which we've been working on. And at the end of that opening sequence, so this was the beginning of what we'd worked on, which was this idea of bloom planting the seed, and then it evolving and it kind of taking over the locations around Spain with this idea of bloom. At some point in the development, there was this idea, and I can't remember who had it. I think it was a riffing around an idea that at the end of this sequence, she's holding a piece of dirt in which a flower is emerging from, that we would then try to merge that with the show. And in that conversation, I'd known about this mechanical lotus flower and the 3D lotus flower, and I thought, oh, we can get that working, and it could even be a side-on or a top-down shot. So that was what we started working on that idea. And at that stage, it was just a concept; it was just words, and we didn't really know what the 3D lotus flower was going to look like. One of the first things I started to do was, again, jump into a sketch to actually show the potential of each of those ideas pretty much straight away as well. Catching the idea hot, I think it's really important when you're onto something and you start to sort of riff off these things and you're trying to create some really cool flowing idea. I went into a sketch and just started to experiment with the idea. Now, originally, I had sketched it thinking it was going to come in off the back of, say, a contestant animation. So at the beginning of each of the contestants' animations, there was this opening sequence we were working on for each of the contestants, and it would reveal itself with the opener. But then, since subsequently after further conversations, it emerged to me, because sometimes you get the wrong end of the stick, that the lotus flower was only going to be used for the opening performance that would be sung by the French winner from the previous competition. And so once I got that in my head, which you sometimes you get the wrong idea. Once I got that in my head, I was then able to work with the guys to make sure that idea. But this sketch kind of like confirmed the overall idea, apart from the fact that I'd originally placed the idea as that the lotus flower would come from a country and then into the opener, but that didn't really make sense. And then it was only like a day later that I was, okay, that's the way to do it. So we began that idea of building and leveling up the 3D lotus flower so that it would merge and interact with the real mechanical lotus flower on the stage. And so here, this was an attempt to go one stage further. Again, I was still holding on to that idea of the country and not the general opener. Eventually I got rid of that idea, and then this was me saying to myself initially, because it was me that was sketching it and trying to think through this idea, and then confirming it with Marvin Dietman, who I was working with, that this was what I was thinking. And we both agreed that it was worth maybe trying a top-down look at the flower, but also a side-on view. And so some style frames worked up. These were done by Farouk, and these were again further confirming the idea and just making sure that some of the problems that we were going to face was to make sure that the 3D version of the animation worked with the real version of the animation. That was something that had been flagged by other parties in RTVE as well, to just make sure. I had done a technical test to make sure that we were going to supply the right files, and that was something that was quite crucial to making sure that we had enough time in the run-up to final delivery to make sure that we had that creative time to make sure that we could create the best look possible. So here was a test closer to the competition starting, where we explored this idea. So this was filmed. And as you can see in the right here, we had the camera being lined up, ready to receive the animation. So it went through the opener and we were able to test this. And this was pretty much by the time we'd had a backwards and forwards with Marvin on timing, because he'd taken what we'd done as a test and he kind of looked at it and saw the timing, just wanted more animation, more butterflies, more motion, so that when we came to this end sequence here and it opened up, they had the camera lined up. So by this point, we'd had the camera lined up, we'd had the timing lined up. And as you can see here, it all worked really well and very seamlessly for all the glows working and all the tailing off animations. As you can see, there was still some there. A nice smooth outro transition into the reality of the contest opening sequence, which was sung by the previous winner from France.